Be calm now. The storm will pass.
He has your strength, Abeni.
Look at his eyes.
The night the child was born, the skies broke open. Rain poured down in angry sheets, hammering the thatched roofs of the small African village. Thunder rolled like drums of war, shaking the very earth. Inside a small clay hut, the cries of a newborn rose above the storm. Sharp, piercing, and endless. Tunde, a respected farmer, held his baby close, his hands trembling. His heart pounded faster than the rain outside. This was not the joyful cry of a new life. It sounded unnatural, painful, haunting. His wife, Abeni, lay weak on the mat, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her voice was soft but full of fear. "Tunde," the elders said, "if a child comes with the storm, it carries a spirit not of this world." Tunde's breath caught in his throat. He looked down at the baby's face. Small, fragile, yet unsettlingly still between screams. Then, as a flash of lightning split the sky, he saw it. One eye was a deep brown, the other a pale, ghostly gray. A chill crawled up Tunde's spine. He took a step back, clutching the child tighter, as though unsure whether to protect or reject him. Outside, the storm howled louder. A sacred iroko tree, the oldest in the village, cracked and fell with a thunderous crash. Villagers ran into the rain, shouting in disbelief. That tree was a protector, a symbol of blessing. Its fall could only mean one thing. Inside the hut, Tunde's eyes met Abeni's. She looked terrified. "The gods," she whispered, "they are angry." Tunde's jaw tightened. He looked again at the child, small fists clenched, tiny chest rising with ragged breaths, and something inside him broke. "What kind of spirit," he said in a trembling voice, "have I brought into this world?" The baby's wail cut through the thunder once more. And then, silence. The storm raged on, but inside the hut all that remained was fear, cut to black. The days after the birth were heavy and strange. The rains stopped, but a quiet unease settled over Tunde's home. At first, it was small things. Chickens died in their coop for no reason. The water in the clay pot turned cloudy overnight. Then the crops began to wither, even though the skies were clear and the soil was good. The people whispered that the curse had begun. Tunde tried to ignore it, but everywhere he went, eyes followed him. When he carried his newborn son through the village, mothers pulled their children closer. Some spat on the ground as he passed, a gesture to drive away evil. Abeni tried to stay strong. She wrapped the baby, Kahinda, in bright cloth and sang to him softly. "He's only a child," she would say. "He's innocent." But even she could not deny that strange things happened around him. Sometimes at night, the baby would stare at the shadows as if he saw something no one else could. Tunde's mind grew restless. He loved his wife and the child she bore, but fear gripped his heart tighter each day. What if the people were right? What if this child carried something dark inside him? One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Tunde went to the village priest, Baba Ola, a man known for his wisdom. The priest listened silently, then said, "The signs are clear. The boy's spirit is not at peace. Take him to the forest shrine. Let the gods decide if he is meant to stay." Abeni begged Tunde not to do it. "He is your son," she cried. "No curse lives in a baby's heart." But Tunde's mind was made up. Tradition could not be ignored. Fear, wrapped in faith, guided his steps. The next morning, they went deep into the forest, to the shrine of Ogun, god of iron and storms. The air was thick with incense and wind. The priest began the ritual, chanting, sprinkling ashes, waving burning herbs over the baby. Kahinda's cries echoed through the forest. Then suddenly, silence. The baby went limp in Tunde's arms. Before Tunde could scream, the priest staggered backward, clutching his chest. His eyes rolled white, and he collapsed beside the altar. The forest fell still. Tunde froze, his heart pounding in his ears. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of smoke and rain-soaked earth, he realized something terrifying. Whatever lived inside his son was far beyond human understanding. To be continued. The priest survived, but only barely. For 3 days, he lay unconscious, and when he finally opened his eyes, his voice trembled as he spoke. "The child's spirit," he said weakly, "is stronger than mine. I could not cleanse him. Protect that boy, Tunde, or you will lose yourself." Those words haunted Tunde. He stood at the edge of the shrine that morning, staring into the misty forest, his baby sleeping quietly in Abeni's arms. For the first time, the wails had stopped, but the silence felt heavier. The air around them was cold, thick with the kind of stillness that followed disaster. Tunde could not look at his son. Each time he tried, the memory of the priest collapsing flashed before him. He saw again that tiny face, those 2 eyes, one bright, one pale, and felt his heart twist. He loved his child, but he also feared him. Back home, the days stretched long and joyless. Tunde spoke little. He spent more time in the fields, even though the crops still refused to grow. Abeni tried to reach him, but he had built a wall between himself and everything. His wife, his faith, even his own son. When Kahinda grew strong enough to crawl, he would reach out toward his father's legs, giggling, waiting to be lifted. But Tunde would step away, pretending not to notice. The guilt burned deep in his chest, but he could not bring himself to touch the child. At night, Abeni held Kahinda close and sang lullabies. Sometimes she wept quietly while the baby slept. She had once dreamed of a happy home. Laughter, the smell of roasted yam, the sound of her husband's stories by firelight. Now, the silence between them was louder than any storm. Years passed, and Kahinda grew into a gentle but lonely boy. He spoke softly, smiled rarely, and preferred to play alone near the riverbank. The other children teased him. "Storm boy," they called him. "The one who brings bad luck." He never fought back. Instead, he would sit by the water and draw strange patterns in the sand. Circles, lines, and shapes no one recognized. The villagers often saw the drawings and whispered. Some said they were witch signs. Others said they looked like sacred marks no child should know. One afternoon, Tunde walked home from the fields and saw his son sitting under the palm tree, drawing again. For a moment he stopped and watched. The boy's small hand moved slowly, tracing symbols with care. There was peace in his face, and something deep, something ancient in his eyes. For a heartbeat, Tunde felt pride and fear at the same time. That night, the guilt grew unbearable. He sat outside, the moon casting silver light across the compound. He thought of all the times he had turned away from his son, of the warmth he had refused to give. He whispered to the wind, "Maybe I have cursed him more than any spirit ever could." Inside, Abeni placed Kahinda to sleep. The boy murmured softly in his dreams, his hands glowing faintly with the moonlight that streamed through the window. When she looked closely, she saw the same patterns from the sand shimmering on his small palms, glowing like white fire before fading away. Abeni gasped, clutching her chest. "Tunde!" she called. "Come quickly!" He rushed in, his face pale. They both stared at the boy's hands, now still, but faintly marked by a symbol neither of them understood. Tunde's breath trembled. He whispered, "It's happening again." The baby they once feared had grown, and with him, something powerful was waking. The fear that Tunde thought he had buried now returned, stronger than before, and deep inside, his guilt twisted into something darker, a question he dared not ask aloud. What if the priest was wrong? What if the boy cannot be saved at all? Cut to black. The years did not bring peace. They only deepened the questions that haunted Tunde's heart. Kahinda was now 12, quiet, thoughtful, and unlike any other child in the village. He did not play with others or laugh at the things boys his age found funny. Instead, he often wandered near the river, sitting for hours as if listening to something unseen. Sometimes, Abeni would find him whispering softly, as though talking to the wind. "My friend lives in the water," he once told her with a shy smile. She had brushed it off, pretending it was just a child's imagination. But when she looked into his eyes, one brown, one gray, she felt an old fear stirring again. Tunde, too, had noticed the boy's strange ways. One night, after a long day in the fields, he found the same glowing symbols drawn on the wall of their hut. Perfectly shaped, beautiful, but unsettling. He stared at them for a long time, his heart heavy with guilt and confusion. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" he whispered. But Kahinda was asleep, breathing softly beside his mother. The whispers in the village grew louder. Some said the boy's drawings brought bad luck. Others claimed they had seen lights moving near the river at night, and Kahinda's shadow among them. One morning, Tunde made a decision. He packed a small bag of food, tied his wrapper, and told Abeni, "I'm going to find answers. If I stay silent any longer, fear will finish us all." He traveled for 2 days across dusty roads and tall grasses until he reached a distant town known for its wise diviners. There he met Baba Eri, an old man whose name carried both fear and respect. The elder's hut was filled with smoke and carved symbols. Cowrie shells and bones lay on the mat before him. His voice was deep and slow, like the earth itself speaking. Tunde bowed low. "My son, he draws signs. They glow under the moon. The priest once called him cursed, but I don't believe in curses anymore. I just need to understand." The old man studied him for a long time. Then, with trembling hands, he spread the cowrie shells before him. His eyes widened. "These are not the marks of a curse," Baba Eri said softly. "They belong to the Eri lineage, ancient protectors of the land. Long ago, your ancestors were guardians of balance between the living and the spirits. Few of their blood remain." Tunde froze. "My ancestors? Protectors?" The elder nodded. "Yes, but a gift misunderstood can destroy its bearer. Your boy is awakening something powerful, something sacred. If you let fear guide you, that power will turn against him." Tunde sat in silence. His throat tightened with guilt. For years, he had seen his son as a curse, when, in truth, he might have been a blessing all along. Before leaving, the elder handed Tunde a small charm carved from river stone. "Give this to him," he said. "When the voices call, it will guide his spirit. But remember, you cannot stop what he was born to be." When Tunde returned home, he found Abeni waiting by the door, her eyes swollen from crying. "He's been hearing things," she said shakily. "Voices by the river. He says they're calling his name." That night, Kahinda could not sleep. The whispering grew louder, soft, rhythmic, like the sound of water against stone. He rose quietly and walked to the window, the moonlight spilling across his face. "Tunde," Abeni said, shaking her husband awake. "He's gone." They ran outside into the cool night. The path to the river shimmered under the moon, footprints small and wet leading into the forest. In the distance, thunder rumbled softly, not in anger this time, but like a heartbeat. Tunde's heart raced as he called into the darkness, "Kahinda, my son!" But there was no answer, only the sound of the river whispering his name. To be continued. The village awoke to the sound of a mother's scream. Abeni's voice tore through the dawn air. "My son, Kahinda is gone." Within minutes, people gathered outside their hut, whispering in fear. Some shook their heads, saying the river had finally taken the boy it called its own. Others muttered that the spirit child had gone to join the underworld. But Tunde did not listen. His heart pounded as he searched every corner of the compound, shouting his son's name until his throat burned. His hands trembled. His breath came in sharp gasps. He looked at Abeni, her eyes swollen, her wrapper loose from crying, and felt his world collapsing again. He followed the voices, she sobbed. He said they were calling him. From the forest, Tunde's heart clenched. The same forest where the cleansing ritual had happened years ago. Without another word, he grabbed a lantern, tied his wrapper tightly, and set off. Abeni tried to follow, but he stopped her, holding her shoulders. "No, stay here. I'll bring him back." His voice cracked as he said it. A promise built on fear and desperation. By the time he reached the forest's edge, clouds had begun to gather. The air grew thick, heavy, alive. The wind moved through the trees like restless spirits whispering secrets. Lightning flashed across the horizon, quick, sharp, and bright, followed by the deep growl of thunder. The storm was returning. Tunde pressed forward, his feet sinking into wet earth, the lantern's light flickering wildly. Raindrops began to fall, slow at first, then in violent sheets. The path grew slippery, but he didn't stop. "Kahinda!" he shouted. "Answer me!" The wind swallowed his voice. As he pushed deeper into the forest, the storm grew angrier. Trees swayed, branches cracked, and leaves whipped through the air. The memories of that night, the first storm, the first cry, came flooding back. It was as if nature itself was reliving the moment when everything began. He stumbled through the darkness until he saw a faint light ahead, a glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. He moved closer, shielding his eyes against the rain. There, in the clearing, stood his son. Kahinda was barefoot, his clothes soaked, his eyes closed. Around him, the air swirled in a perfect circle, the wind bending, the rain curving away from him as though afraid to touch him. His small hands were raised, and on his palms glowed the same strange markings, brighter than ever, alive with white fire. Before him stood the ancient shrine, cracked, covered in moss, and trembling under the force of the storm. The same shrine where years ago a priest had fallen trying to cleanse him. Tunde's knees weakened. He wanted to call out, but his voice caught in his throat. The sight before him was both terrifying and beautiful. His child, surrounded by power, untouched by chaos. Lightning flashed, striking the idol at the shrine's center. Instead of destroying it, the light seemed to pour into it, and then out again, connecting the statue to the boy. For a moment, father and son were joined by light. Kahinda's voice rose in the air, not screaming, not speaking, but chanting words that sounded ancient, older than time itself. The wind howled louder, circling him like a living spirit. And then, silence. The storm froze. Raindrops hung in midair. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Tunde's eyes widened as he saw cracks form across the idol's stone surface. Light poured out from inside it, gold, white, silver, until it shattered with a thunderous crack. A wave of warm air rushed outward, knocking Tunde to the ground. He shielded his face, expecting pain, but instead he felt peace. When he looked up, the storm had begun to fade. The rain softened, the thunder grew distant. Above him, the clouds broke open, revealing a patch of clear sky where sunlight gently streamed through. Kahinda swayed on his feet, eyes fluttering. The light on his palms dimmed, leaving faint scars in the shape of the same old symbols. Then, slowly, he fell. Tunde's heart lurched. He ran forward, catching his son before he hit the ground. The boy's body was limp but warm. He was breathing. Barely. Tunde held him close, tears mixing with the rain. "My son, what have you done? What are you?" The wind shifted again, soft and low, like a whisper brushing past his ear. "You must remember the truth." Tunde froze. The voice was not Kehinda's. It was ancient, echoing through the forest itself. The same tone the old diviner had spoken of. He looked down at his son's face, peaceful, glowing faintly with that same light, and realized that this was no curse. This was something much greater. He stood, cradling the boy against his chest, and began the long walk home through the fading storm. The trees no longer groaned. The air no longer trembled. Instead, the world around him seemed to bow in quiet respect, as though it, too, now knew who the child truly was. Cut to black. The dawn after the storm came slowly, as if the sun itself was unsure it could rise again. Mist rolled over the fields. The ground glistened with rain, and from the forest path a single figure emerged. Tunde, drenched, weary, carrying his son in his arms. The villagers watched in silence as he walked into the square. His steps were heavy, his face streaked with mud and tears, but his eyes burned with something new. Not fear, not shame, but understanding. Abeni ran forward, her wrapper flying behind her. "Tunde!" she cried. "Is he—" "He lives," Tunde whispered, voice raw. "He's alive." They laid Kehinda gently inside their hut. His breathing was soft, his body weak, but peaceful. The strange symbols on his palms still glowed faintly, fading like dying embers. Abeni knelt beside him, holding his hand, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Outside, however, the village was already stirring with unrest. The storm had terrified them. Lightning splitting the trees, wind tearing through rooftops. Now rumors were spreading fast. The spirit boy caused it. He called the thunder again. He must be stopped. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered. Drums beat low and angry. The old priest, the same one who had once declared the twins cursed, stood before the people leaning on his staff. He raised his hand. "This child is not of us," he said. "He brings ruin wherever he walks." Last night, the river rose and the storm came again. "How many more signs do we need?" The people murmured in agreement. Some carried palm leaves for protection. Others clutched charms to their chests. Then, from the doorway of his hut, Tunde stepped out. Rainwater still dripped from his clothes. He stood tall, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "Enough," he said. "You will not touch my son." The crowd fell quiet. The priest's eyes narrowed. "You defy the gods?" Tunde shook his head. "No, I defy ignorance." Gasps rippled through the crowd. But he did not stop. "For years I believed your words. I let you bury my child, shame my family, and fill my wife with fear. But I have seen the truth with my own eyes. My son is not cursed. He is chosen." The priest scoffed. "Chosen? By what spirit?" "By the same power that keeps the river alive," Tunde said, his voice growing stronger. "The storm last night, it wasn't meant to destroy us. It cleansed us. The boy broke the seal of an old wrong we forgot." He turned, gesturing toward the forest. "That shrine we feared? It was built by our ancestors, the Eri people, to protect the balance between earth and spirit. When greed and fear took over, we forgot their duty. My son restored it." The villagers exchanged uncertain looks. Some lowered their charms. Others stepped closer, listening. Abeni emerged beside him, holding Kehinda's charm, the river stone the diviner had given them. She lifted it high. When he touched this, the storm obeyed him. "You call that a curse? I call it grace." The priest's hands trembled. "Lies! The boy's power is unnatural." "Then tell me," Tunde demanded, stepping forward, "why the river runs calm today? Why the sky is clear after a night of rage? If he were cursed, would peace follow him? The silence that followed was deep, the kind that makes even the wind stop to listen. Then, slowly, an elder woman stepped forward. Mama Folake, oldest in the village, her back bent with age, but her eyes sharp. "I remember," she said softly. "When I was a girl, my grandmother spoke of the Ari lineage. They said a time would come when a child would be born with two eyes of different colors, one to see the world of men and one to see the world beyond. That child would bring balance between both." Her gaze turned to Kahinda's sleeping face. "The prophecy has come true." The crowd murmured again, this time not in fear, but in awe. Men removed their hats. Women knelt. The old priest's lips quivered. His staff shook in his hand. Tunde's eyes filled with tears. He knelt beside his son, whispering, "You were never cursed." "I was, cursed by my own blindness." He pressed his forehead against Kahinda's hand. "Forgive me, my son." And then, as if hearing those words, the boy's fingers twitched. His eyes fluttered open, one brown, one gray, gleaming softly in the morning light. He looked around, confused, but calm. "Father," he whispered, "the storm is gone." Tunde smiled through tears. "Yes, my son. You sent it away." Abeni covered her mouth, sobbing quietly, this time not from fear, but from relief. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the villagers gathered again, not to accuse, but to honor. They rebuilt the broken shrine near the river, placing offerings of white flowers and clean water. For the first time in years, there was laughter in the air, drums of celebration instead of warning. Kahinda stood beside his father, still weak but smiling. Tunde placed a hand on his shoulder. "The world will not always understand you," he said softly, "but I will stand beside you until my last breath." The boy nodded. "And I will listen to the wind. It carries our ancestors' voices," Tunde smiled. "Then let them guide us." As the drums rose and the firelight danced across their faces, the once broken family stood together, no longer cursed, no longer afraid, just a father, a mother, and a son, reborn by truth. Fade out, years passed. The storms that once haunted the village became gentle rains. The river that had once raged now flowed calm and steady, clear enough to see the stones beneath its surface. The people often said, "Since the boy of two eyes came, even the sky has learned peace." The changed village, the village of Eid, once feared the unseen. They built charms against shadows and whispered about curses in the dark. But now, the people had learned to live differently. They rebuilt their shrines, not out of fear, but out of respect. They taught their children to pour water on the ground before eating, saying, "Let the earth drink before we do." Every year, on the anniversary of the great storm, they gathered by the river with drums, candles, and songs, not to mourn, but to give thanks. They called it the Day of Renewal. At the heart of the celebration stood a young man, tall, quiet, and calm, his gaze as deep as the river itself. It was Kahinda. He had grown into a gentle teacher, his voice steady, his presence peaceful. Children loved to gather around him, listening as he told stories about the world of spirits, about kindness, and about listening to the voice of nature. Sometimes, when the sun was low and the wind was soft, his eyes would shimmer faintly, one brown, one gray, and the air would hum with quiet energy. The villagers said the ancestors spoke through him. He never claimed power. He only smiled and said, "Light is not meant to be feared. It is meant to guide." Tunde's redemption Tunde had grown older, his beard silver, his back a little bent. But his spirit, lighter than it had ever been. Every morning, he would walk to the riverbank where everything had once gone wrong, and right again. He would sit there in silence, watching the sun rise over the water. Sometimes, Kehinda joined him. Other times, Tunde sat alone, whispering softly to the memory of his other son. "I understand now," he would say. "You left so your brother could carry both your spirits." There was peace in his words, the kind that comes only after a lifetime of mistakes and forgiveness. One day, Kehinde brought him a small carving, a pair of twins holding hands, their faces turned toward the sky. "I made this," Kehinde said, smiling, "for our home, so we never forget where our story began." Tunde's eyes filled with tears. He took the carving in his hands, nodding slowly. "Once I feared what I did not understand," he said. "But now I see the greatest curse a man can carry is his own blindness. And the greatest miracle is when his child teaches him to see." They sat together in silence, the wind warm and full of life around them. The circle completed as years turned into decades. Kehinde's name spread far beyond Ede. Travelers came from distant lands to learn from the boy of two eyes, the one who could calm storms and heal hearts with words alone. But to him, it was never about power. It was about harmony. He taught that every person carried two eyes within, one for the seen and one for the unseen. Only when both were open could a soul find balance. When people asked how he learned such wisdom, he would simply say, "Because my father believed in me, even when it was almost too late." The final morning one morning, when the river shimmered gold and the birds sang like laughter, Tunde took his last walk to the water's edge. His steps were slow, but his smile was light. He sat beneath the same tree where he had once held his son through the storm. The air was calm, the wind warm. As he closed his eyes, he whispered, "I am not afraid anymore." When Kehinde found him later, his father's face was peaceful, his hands resting on the carving of the twins. That evening, the villagers lit candles across the river. The water reflected hundreds of tiny flames, a sky of stars upon the earth. Kehinde stood among them, his heart heavy, yet full of peace. He raised his hands to the sky, feeling the wind move gently around him. "I will carry your light," he said softly, "as you carried mine." The river glowed faintly beneath the moon, as if answering him. Epilogue. The legacy lives generations later. The story of Tunde and Kehinde became legend. Parents told it to their children whenever fear entered their homes. They would end with the same words that Kehinde had once spoken. The light we fear is often the light meant to save us. And so, in the heart of Ede, where a storm once raged and a father once wept, peace endured. The wind carried songs of love, the river flowed steady, and in the silence between both, the ancestors whispered, "Balance has returned. Fade to black."